To start off with, I want you to understand this is not CSI. We are 4 days into a very long investigation. And if you took the weekend out, we're about 2.5 days into this long investigation because some entities aren't open during the weekend. So just keep that in mind as we go through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over our timeline that we gave during the press release, and then I'm going to go over all of the new things that we've learned since we put that press release out. At 8:26 on Friday, the Mason County Sheriff's Office, one of our supervisors received a phone call from a subject saying that he had done something bad and that he was suicidal. The supervisor at that point assigned two officers to go up to the residence, but then he realized, I probably ought to get this guy back on the phone and stay in touch with him. So he called him back and stayed in touch with him while he drove up to the residence. When the deputies arrived at the residence, this supervisor was in contact with the suspect and said he had had a gun to his head. Once the deputies made contact with the residence, a 12-year-old female came out of the front door and ran towards deputies. She ran to the side that was beyond that residence on that one-way driveway. It was just one driveway going in and out, and she ran beyond the residence. So now we had a deputy with her, and they were effectively trapped because in order to go back in front of the residence, there was a window there, and he had a handgun, and we knew that he could shoot at the deputy or the 12-year-old female, so they were trapped on that side. Deputies continued discussion with the suspect while a multi-agency response of law enforcement began. A limited number of Mason County Sheriff's deputies that were on scene established a perimeter along with Fish and Wildlife and the other people that were in the area that responded to help us. They set up containment around the residence because many times if we have an incident like this, the individual will try to leave the residence and may even try to go and get hostages elsewhere. So we set up containment around the residence as well and continued to be in communication with him. They still worked on trying to get this individual to surrender peacefully. While discussions continued, the officers learned from the individual that there were deceased people in the chicken coop. At that point, one of the officers who had set up containment on the chicken coop looked inside and did confirm that there were bodies in there. A Mason County surplus military vehicle, it's called an MRAP, a mine-resistant armor-protected vehicle, was used to drive past the residence, get to the officer that was waiting with the injured, or not, the female that came out of the residence, and they were able to extricate her to medical that was waiting to take a look at her. Trained negotiators arrived, and they continued to speak with the suspect for over 3.5 hours in an effort to convince him to peacefully surrender. During this time, the suspect could be seen moving around the house with a firearm in his hand, often with it held to his own head. After several hours, it became evident that the suspect was not going to leave the residence voluntarily. At that time, Mason County Sheriff's Office SWAT team introduced chemical agents to the residence. The suspect exited the residence with the gun in his hand, yelled at the officers before returning to the residence. Once again, he exited, was right on the threshold of the house, the residence, and he put the gun to his head and shot himself in front of the officers that were there. SWAT officers, which includes a trained paramedic SWAT team member, immediately moved up to the residence, checked on the suspect, but determined that he was beyond medical help. The officers then started a search of the main residence and approximately 11 outbuildings around that residence and property. Investigators at that point took over the scene at approximately 12:40. Now, what have we learned since then? And I want to remind you, this was a career criminal that murdered 4 people, victimized a 5th, and then shot himself. The Department of State was able to verify on Monday morning that the 2 victim boys were both adopted from Kazakhstan. As far as the subject, or the suspect, he had an extensive criminal history, but none of the crimes were violent crimes that we could find. In Pennsylvania, he had multiple felonies related to property crimes such as theft, theft by deception, forgery, and the like. In Wyoming, property crimes, obtaining property by false pretenses, a felony. In Missouri, impersonating a police officer, grand larceny, felony false pretenses, etc. There was multiple pages of criminal history. We believe that the weapons used and the weapon that was in the suspect's hand that he shot himself with was a Walther PPK .380 caliber handgun. The weapon was registered to Terry Carlson, the late husband of Lana Carlson. This is a picture of a like weapon that was used. This is not a picture of the weapon because obviously it's still in evidence. And I will make this available to you later. Some questions have been brought up in reference to court orders. Campbell was served a Kitsap County District Court order and all attachments on July 17th of 2015. The Mason County Sheriff's Office sent and completed a return of service to Kitsap County District Court. The Kitsap County Court order contained a notice of surrender of firearms directing the suspect to surrender any firearms that he had to law enforcement. The suspect submitted to the Kitsap County Courthouse a notice of non-surrender on July 27th declaring that he had no weapons to surrender. At no time was the Mason County Sheriff's Office required to contact or search the residence. We were not required to contact Campbell about the court order other than to serve the court order from Kitsap County. The Mason County Sheriff's Office was never directed by the court to confiscate any firearms from the suspect, and I'll go into more detail on that later on. The duty of the Sheriff's Office for a service of an anti-harassment order, which this was, with an order to surrender weapons issued without notice attached. Okay, the first thing that we do is we serve the order and any attachments that are attached to it by the court, as directed by the court. Then we, after we've served it, and oftentimes our community service officer is the one that's serving it, who is a non-armed, non-fully commissioned officer who serves the paper. We give a return of service to the court saying that we did serve that paperwork. If at the time of the service, when it has an order to surrender weapons, the person indicates that they do have weapons, at that point we will bring an officer and retrieve those or recover those weapons. It is the responsibility of the person that has been served to submit to the court of origin, within 5 days, either proof of surrender of these weapons with a receipt from law enforcement or a notice of declaration of non-surrender. Again, Mr. Campbell was served the Kitsap County District Court order and all attachments on July 17th by one of our deputies. Mason County sent back a completed return of service to Kitsap County District Court. Mr. Campbell submitted a notice of non-surrender on July 27th to the Kitsap County, and on that non-surrender it says, I have surrendered any firearms other than dangerous weapons or other dangerous weapons or concealed pistol license pursuant to the order because I do not have any of those items. So he signed a document and sent it back to Kitsap County saying that he did not have any dangerous weapons, any firearms, or any concealed weapons. There's still more tests to be done. They have to actually analyze the lead and match it with the weapon to see if that in fact is bullets from that weapon. It appears at this point that it was an execution style in the chicken coop. Any convicted felon is not allowed to have possession of firearms. That's the law says that you cannot have possession of firearms.
Even if they belong to somebody else and they're in the same house?
Well, are you the... Depends on if you're the person in charge of that residence. You have constructive possession. We did have other firearms in the house, but we're still waiting for a return from ATF because they've been very good on tracking the weapons. We did have some long guns, which would include a single-shot shotgun, a 22, 12-gauge shotgun, another 22, and a bolt-action rifle. But at this point, there's no indication they were used in the crime, but we still have to wait to see how the tests come out.
The order in question was an anti-harassment order, an order of protection. It's different than a no-contact order in which, for example, a case of domestic violence may be involved, where the courts compel us to go in and seize weapons with the proper documentation. This being a lower tier order of protection, it is a voluntary and an honor system. And so when you say we had no point at that time, based on the issuance of those orders, to believe he was a danger. It was a dispute between two neighbors over an issue.